Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Now, tomorrow, Theresa May travels to Dublin in the role of a supplicant, seeking concessions to appease her angry backbenchers. It's the first time a British leader has ever gone in such a role to a city where only a century ago the British state sent gunboats to enforce its will. Does this mark a new relationship of power on these islands, or is it a temporary blip of Brexit? We're joined now from Dublin by the celebrated writer Fintan O'Toole. And in your book, Heroic Failure, Brexit and the Politics of Pain, you look at colonisation and what part that's playing in this. Can you explain?
So it's a very strange phenomenon, isn't it, John, that in order to get to Brexit, you have to go through a mental process of imagining yourself to be intolerably oppressed by the European Union. Now, the European Union is open to a lot of criticism. I've given it a lot of criticism myself. But it's not an invading, colonizing force. Yet, you know, in this discourse that you've had, in England in particular, I think over the last 25 years, it's been imagined as such. You've had this kind of hyping up of minor irritations about regulations, many of them, of course, fictional, but you've had the hyping up of those into a notion somehow that Britain has been colonized by Europe, and that in a funny way, Britain didn't win the Second World War. It sort of ultimately lost it because the Germans, through the European Union, have insidiously taken over. It's a crazy, dark fantasy, but the ultimate grotesque irony of it is that if you start imagining yourself into this position of thinking of yourself as a colony, you kind of end up like one. So you end up with a deal that, while colony would be an overstatement, does in fact place Britain in a secondary relationship to the European Union. It's a sort of mad warning against being very, very careful what you fantasize about, because you may well end up with it.
Viewed from Dublin, how important is tomorrow?
Sadly, tomorrow is much less important than it ought to be. I mean, you're absolutely right what you said in your introduction about this being a unique moment. We've never had anything like this, where you effectively have a British Prime Minister coming to Dublin looking for an Irish government to bail Britain out of a very profound crisis. The problem is that, and I think this is not well understood in Britain, that there's actually not that much the Irish government can actually do. The Irish government will be very open to any kind of language in the political declaration that will make things a bit easier for Theresa May. The Irish are good at language, but I don't think anybody really believes that there's going to be enough language that's going to meet the demand for a legally binding commitment to undermine the backstop. An Irish government simply can't do this, and it can't do it because this is a vital national interest on the island of Ireland. We can't go back to a hard border and all of the implications that would have for the peace process. Theresa May herself, just last year in her Florence speech, said that avoiding a hard border in Ireland was one of the main demands of Britain in the negotiations with the European Union. You know, so this wasn't just an Irish thing. After all, Northern Ireland is part of the United Kingdom. But this is, it's impossible for an Irish government to just sort of say that's over.
But this is deeply worrying. I mean, your analysis surely ignores the fact that, we have to keep repeating it, I guess, that this is the fifth or sixth biggest economy in the world.
Absolutely, absolutely it is. And you know, the strange thing in a lot of the current talk about Ireland and Ireland being blamed for all of this is there is no country in the world that wants closer, more friendly relations with Britain than Ireland does. I'm sure you remember back, John, to 2011 when Queen Elizabeth came to visit Dublin for the first time in 100 years that a British monarch could actually come to the Irish state. And the atmosphere then was so wonderful. There was an absolutely, you know, joyous sense that all this dark history is over. We can get on with having a very normal relationship of close neighbours and friends who are intertwined. And Brexit really has thrown all of that up in the air, but it was always going to. I mean, from the very start, if you were watching it from here, you could see that there was simply no seriousness about addressing the Irish part of the Brexit problem. And it's the return of the repressed. If you don't acknowledge something, if you don't talk about it, you're going to end up with a problem.
Fintan O'Toole, thank you very, very much for joining us. Thank you.